Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Finnish Internet Forum here in the city of Tampere, also known as Manse, Manchester of Finland, due to its industrial past. Nowadays, Tampere is the third largest city in Finland. Yeah, Finland doesn't really have any big cities. And it is also known for its thriving IT and biotech sector. Without further ado, we will launch to the program of the Finnish Internet Forum.
I'm Timo Harakka, the Minister of Transport and Communications, and it's only fitting and symbolic that this is my last official duty in this function, as we'll have a new government this week. And above all, it's a great pleasure and honor to say a few welcoming words to this distinguished crowd. Looking back at the very interesting 4 years we've had, I'm immensely proud of what we did right at the beginning, 2019, when Finland was holding the rotating presidency of the European Union. Then we laid the groundwork to the tsunami of data regulation that has come into effect or is about to be finalized in the near future. The principles of human-centric, open, interoperable communications, data, and internet are very much present in the Digital Markets Act, Digital Services Act, Data Governance Act, and the very, very topical and pertinent AI Act, and what I consider as a crown jewel of European data regulation, the forthcoming Data Act. The Data Act will open up resources for all, not just a few. And looking ahead, I'm sure that we all are concerned about the geopolitical and geoeconomic realities that we are facing right now, and we are rightly so worried and concerned about how to ensure human rights, fundamental rights, interoperability of the internet. And this will be our main task, to govern data and the data economy in a human-centered, open, transparent way, to ensure that internet will not become a splinternet. We all have, I think, an even more important task in front of us, and thus I wish you all a very, very successful conference and all the best. Thank you very much.
So this is Timo Harakka's last day as minister, but actually after this, there's one more official act, I think, because you are going to the symposium or seminar organized by the President of the Republic about foreign and security policy. That is in Helsinki in the afternoon, and that's why Timo has to leave pretty soon. So perhaps we go straight to this. So, a minister, member of parliament, but also a journalist, award-winning television journalist. I'm sure that many Finns still remember your programs like the Musta Laatikko, Black Box. Also a writer, non-fiction writer. You have written about various types of crises, financial crisis, way back 2009, euro crisis, and so on and so forth. And now, the data capitalism in the world of crises. The book is in Finnish, but actually it also exists in English, and you can, from that QR code, you can download it for free from his website. So let's talk about the book. And you have said that it has been a learning story, a learning experience. What do you mean by that?
Well, thank you, Yrjö. Certainly, it is rather extraordinary that a minister should write the book during his tenure about the very field of what is in his or her work. And that is precisely because it has been a very steep learning curve and educational progress for myself. Because you might be aware that not all politicians are so entrenched or embedded in digital or data governance issues, but it is increasingly important and increasingly the locus of international cooperation or lack thereof. And as we can consider data as being the most valuable resource on Earth, that's why it's called data capitalism. I argue that data is the most important capital in modern economy. So it is increasingly important that also democracies, electorates, nations and politicians pay more attention to who is governing data and on what grounds.
Pretty early in this learning experience, according to your book, you discovered that in spite of the mighty reputation that Finland has, we actually didn't have a data strategy. And also data, all these matters were sort of distributed among the various ministries and agencies.
Well, it's quite true because for good and bad, Finland is an engineering country. We are good at innovations, we're good at early adapters of technology. That's why it still is rather mind-blowing the amount of and the role of mobile data in this society, which is absolutely something that differentiates Finland from other countries. We use 3 times more mobile data than Sweden, for instance, per capita. And all these kinds of innovations, this kind of very embeddedness of new data, technology and internet and mobile internet to our society and communications kind of belies the fact that data is a very political issue, particularly in these times in Europe, where we as a part of new geopolitics and new geoeconomics are kind of reconfiguring the rules of engagement in economic sphere. So there's a lot of protectionism, there's a lot of national interests, there's a lot of this kind of power struggles that we as an engineers are not as accustomed to. And we would need to coordinate better within our government and also in politics to kind of answer these kind of issues. And that is one of the most important things that I've learned. Now, I guess tomorrow, from the European Union, an economic security strategy is due. Economic security strategy is a governing document of the European Union for the near future. And it's hugely important what kind of principles that document will promote. And that is also something that needs to be taken into account. For instance, are we looking inward, protecting European industries, or are we looking outwards to ensure that Europe is a global player in key technologies? We have a few key technologies that Finland and Europe is leading the world into, and we need to promote those.
Okay, the title of the book, Data Capitalism. What is here old capitalism that even Marx would recognize, and what is new? How data capitalism differs, and in which way it is similar to what we know as capitalism?
Well, in my opinion, capitalism is a success story in that it survived for several centuries and decades, but it has various forms, also regional forms, but also forms that are defining a certain era. When we talk about early manufacturing, then we talk about post-manufacturing, and then we talk about the most important forms of capital that I argue is data. That is why Meta, Amazon, Alphabet, Google, Microsoft are the biggest companies, the most valuable companies on earth, is because there's a lot of expectation embedded and discounted in their valuations, so that data will become even more concentrated to these a few mega corporations. So what Marx would acknowledge is that there certainly is an accumulation of this capital. So one of the rules, or I'd say a data greed imperative, leads to all companies try to accumulate as much data as they can, because you never know what's the intrinsic worth of it. You will only find out later. Very often you just discover that you could use some client or customer data for this and that purpose that is very valuable and will increase the value of your company and business only later. So just to be on the safe side, you'll accumulate as much data as you can. Now, if your grocery store would say that we are not interested in customer data anymore, so we will not track customers' shopping habits anymore. We are not interested how many cartons of washing detergent you buy or how much ice cream. We won't follow you. We're not interested in your data. So we'd all be surprised. How could anyone resist of accumulation of data? So this is one aspect that is hugely important. But on the other hand, what Marx already discovered back in the 19th century was that networks is both the strength and weakness of capitalism. As we all know, networks provide a huge outreach of capitalism and market economy and data economy for the good as well, for the benefits of many, as much as we can increase the reach of internet, the better. But on the other hand, as COVID-19 crisis and the Russian unjust aggression to Ukraine have proven, these chains have proven to be very unresilient.
In this book, you pose the question, is data the new oil? And you answer yes and no.
Yes, that's a kind of a old metaphor that data is the new oil. And to some extent, there are similarities if we talk about competition or lack thereof, and stifling of innovation of these mega corporations. As we all know, Google, Amazon, Meta, they all kind of acquire all these startups and lots of interesting innovation to their ecosystems and stifle them. And there is increasing evidence that these mega corporations really hamper competition, both in US, both in Europe, as well as they hamper innovation. So that is the part where we need to ask whether something like trust busting in the early 20th century is needed for these mega corporations. But on the other hand, I think ultimately it's not right to equate data with oil or any resource that can be extracted. That metaphor is wrong, because data does not exist without recording. That is always a human process. There is no such thing philosophically as raw data. So it is always a contract between the data provider and the data user, and this is obviously in center of all these power politics that are concerning data. Who will govern data? And that is very much in the center of the book. Precisely because in the heart of these multi-trillion businesses, there is this fundamental open question. Is this capital really owned by these companies? Or is it just stolen by them? Or is it just what kind of contract exists? Who has the rights for the data? And this still remains unsolved. I give you an example. Back in 2020, many governments were asking Apple and Google that they would share data or help build a application that would really do the trick in resisting COVID-19. Now, Apple and Google both rejected this plea. They said they will not. They will respect their clients' anonymity and the data security and not give it away. Now, that in very blunt terms gives you an example who actually gets to decide on the use of data, even for the benefit of humankind.
As in the book, you describe in a very lively way at lunch, which was held in the Ministry of Economy and Finance and Digital and Industrial Sovereignty of France. That's really the name of the where the ministers of European ministers 2 weeks after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia actually took the tech giants, their CEOs, at task and told them that you are, with your algorithms, you are helping the Russians in their disinformation activities. Did it lead to any improvement? And also, is it possible to actually regulate algorithms in any way?
Is it possible to regulate algorithms? It's a very interesting and important and difficult question because of the sheer complexity of the so-called data pipelines that are involved in even the simplest platforms or applications. So in practical terms, the answer must be no. But on the other hand, it is hugely important to kind of be able to make them more transparent or regulated, because suddenly they pose a certain kind of threat. That became apparent after the Russian invasion, because then the recommendation algorithms of the most popular social media or other media feeds proved their kind of that they're not up to task when we come to these crucial or fatal questions even. For instance, if you queried invasion of Russia, Ukraine in YouTube, so the most recommended video would be someone explaining to you why the invasion of Ukraine is the fault of the West. This is how these algorithms work. And on the other hand, also when these terrible facts and pictures of the massacre of Bucha came public, Facebook algorithm would deny and reject all material that would give people the information of this terrible war crime, because all this material was considered to be too violent. So yes, there were 27 of the ministers having lunch with Google, Meta, YouTube, Twitter, and others. And what usually is a very convivial lunch discussion turned out to be more or less of a tribunal. But I'm sorry to inform you that I don't think that much improvement on these issues have been done recently. I was with the formidable Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Digital Transformation, Mikhailo Fedorov, and he was asking Facebook to replace these automatic algorithms with real people to make the difference between unduly violent content and this kind of important war information in Facebook. And he was promised that there would be improvement. But you know, we politicians, we feel a little uneasy when somebody just promises that they will fix their ways. We rather be the ones to determine that this would be the case.
Okay, you talk about the big five here in this the projects, legislative projects, regulatory projects of the European Union. As a whole, is it possible that this regulation actually can catch up with the technological progress, or is it always so that regulation comes a little bit after?
I think it's exactly as it should be. I mean, if we had legislation coming before the technology, that would mean that we would have no innovation at all. We would have kind of predicted whatever comes and nothing would surprise us. That's the whole point of technological innovation, that legislation needs to catch up. And it could be a mission impossible. We all acknowledge this. So that kind of criticism, I think it's rather moot. What we need to do is to have flexible legislation that can kind of adapt to new situations. And I certainly hope AI Act will be that kind of legislation. I'm sure that Mia-Petra Kumpula-Natri, our formidable MEP, will share some thoughts about that later on. But as I realize, for the legislation we've done in Finland as well, concerning 5G, for instance, is that as the old kind of ideal of legislation would be endurance, so that you would put out legislation that would stay in place for decades because it would be so good and so comprehensive. Now we have to change the ideal of legislation and regulation to make it flexible and open enough to accommodate new technical innovations. And yes, I think, and I really support Professor Anu Bradford, who's written a great book on the Brussels effect 10 years back, and is producing a new book also in the autumn, which is very much on similar vein than mine, that Europe as a regulator of a rule maker can make a difference to ensure that technology is a force for good and beneficial for all peoples. Now, what we need to do is to take care that the rest of the world, the less affluent parts of the world, will have the access to technology as well. So I think this is a hugely important task, and I hope that we'll remain generous to African, Latin American, and other countries and underserved communities in general to kind of ensure that they will have the opportunities for growth and collaboration.
Okay, as I said before, you are going to an event in Helsinki, which is a sort of symposium seminar organized every year by the President of the Republic. Usually it takes place in Kultaranta, which is the summer residence, but now that is being refurbished and this takes place in Helsinki. Could you give us a preview of what you are going to say at that event?
Right. Now, what I think is really important and good is that for the first time, technology is one of the subjects of this security symposium. We very much talk about either military security, or then we talk about resilience, which are important, but what kind of part does technology play in this new geopolitical and geoeconomic reality is hugely important. And one example is that we need to really think why, as actually President Niinistö pointed out very pertinently yesterday, is why there is a large amount of world population that is not subscribing to West's values. It's not. It could be even outright hostile to the democratic West, the U.S. and Europeans. Why is it so? Well, I think one answer is, as Manuel Castells already 25 years ago predicted, that when we get a more networked society or global society, the losers and winners of the new network societies, that difference will be, and that gulf will be even steeper. Now Chinese have realized this kind of opportunity to provide the developing world with infrastructure, also both physical infrastructure, bridges, rails, roads, and harbors, and also digital infrastructure, networks, so that they can grow and they can develop their own countries. And Europe and US have kind of been on the sidelines watching that China is kind of expanding this sphere of influence in the world. And what is our answer? Now, as President Niinistö said, we cannot impose our values. We cannot come preaching that others should be like us. But what I think we could export are the virtues and values of sovereignty. Now, if we think about sovereignty very deeply and independence very deeply, so what we can provide is that instead of being locked into Chinese technology, being path dependent on a certain technological and thus political choices, we could offer that all the technology and all the goods that are brought by the technology could be held within that country, that they could own the data, for instance. The data would not go to Silicon Valley, it would not go to Beijing. They would govern the data, they would own it and use it for their own good. It could be interoperable with neighboring countries, and they could, for instance, feed their own AIs for their own purposes, and they would be able to collaborate independently and sovereignly with their peers. So this could be the promise of European and US technology as an offering to bolster the real sovereignty and growth of developing nations.
I think we are out of time, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Arto Laitinen. I'm a professor of social philosophy here at Tampere University, and it's a great honor to be able to discuss our findings and ongoing research on the ethics of AI with you in this on this occasion. So I will first say a couple of words about the background project, about which has been responsible for some of the research, and then Otto Sahlgren will be speaking about half an hour or so. And then we have three commentaries by Salla Westerstrand, who is on site, and then two other people from online, Marko, Latvanen, and Susanna, Mäkelä, and I will introduce them when it's their turn. And then there's some time for questions and answers, and we hope that we will maybe get a brief commentary from Mia-Petra Kumpula-Natri as well, who has agreed to say something about the AI Act developments. So without further ado, this session is about ethical aspects of artificial intelligence. From the viewpoint of philosophers, ethics has always been there. There's no need to innovate something. Things have been right and wrong even before electricity was invented, and many of the same principles that were right and wrong still hold. But what is puzzling is that the world to which we apply these ethical understandings is changing very rapidly. So that's why very systematic work is needed for seeing how this applies to AI. In the research project on human-centered AI solutions for the smart city called KITE, which was a multidisciplinary research project on human-centered AI, which lasted from November 19 to 22. We had 6 work packages, and one work package was focused on these ethical questions of artificial intelligence. So we, in our work package, where Otto Sahlgren was the main researcher, we kind of went through the masses of different proposals for AI ethics in international discussions, and then tried to see that what all this looks like from the viewpoint of, for example, companies in the Pirkanmaa area or Tampere area. And Otto will now talk us through of some important points. And Otto is a doctoral researcher in philosophy at Tampere University and specializes in questions related to fairness and non-discrimination and in AI. So maybe at this stage, Otto can continue.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm Otto Sahlgren. I'm a doctoral researcher here in Tampere University. I'm doing my PhD thesis in philosophy, so I'm studying political theory, the ethics of AI, and all the good stuff. As Arto said, we worked on the ethics work package of the KITE project. You can scan the QR code to see our website. And I'm going to talk about the findings of our ethics work package, and especially the ethical recommendations we give regarding human-centered AI. Where should I point this? Okay, the technology has turned against me today, it seems. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe I could tell a couple of jokes. I won't. So, we were tasked with developing ethics guidelines for human-centered AI, especially AI solutions used in the smart city, so to speak. And coming to this discussion on the ethics of AI, which is a big discussion, we were faced with a whole range of ethical problems that had been identified by researchers, by activists, by journalists, and also a wide range of ethics guidelines developed prior to us. Yeah, thanks. Now it's reaching. So, some of the ethical issues that you can see in the research literature include, for example, unreliable performance by AI systems, which can create safety risks, harms to individuals and groups. Also, disparate system performance and outcomes due to unfair bias. So, for example, if your data is unrepresentative or it tracks prior societal bias, it can lead to amplified or exacerbated inequalities. Then we know that from the need for increasing amounts of data and computing resources, this dynamic has often led to privacy violations and also environmental harms when this leads to significant emissions. Thank you. But the one thing that we can find when we look at literature and also public discussions about AI ethics is that these problems that you find in the machine learning system pipeline or the AI pipeline also reflect and contribute to broader social and political harms. For example, we've seen political polarization and erosion of trust, legitimacy, and public accountability being driven by data-driven systems and AI systems used by large corporations such as Meta. We've seen the exacerbation of social and structural inequalities, massive human rights violations that are at least to which AI systems contribute. We've seen that climate change, environmental degradation, migration crisis, all are being exacerbated by novel technologies. And also, as we've heard just before from Timo, that these problems that power is concentrated to private entities and big tech monoliths are also a part of the picture of the ethics of AI. So coming to this discussion, we see that we had our hands full, to say the least. And then the other side of the coin is how are these problems addressed in the literature and in public discussions? For one, we saw that there were already roughly 200 ethics guidelines for AI. And then, as a response to these guidelines, we see a lot of discussion on their limitations and also their shortcomings. For example, these are just a couple of headlines I picked up from the internet regarding ethics guidelines and AI ethics tools that practitioners use to align their AI systems with public values. We see that there's the headline, "We don't need any more guidelines or frameworks for ethical AI. It's time to regulate." Also, there's another similar headline, "It's not enough for AI to be ethical. It also needs to be rights respecting." They're saying we're failing at the ethics of AI. We should make real impact. Principles alone cannot guarantee that AI systems align with public values. And also, when the tools that we have available to align AI systems with public values are misapplied or misused, this can lead only to more problems. For example, there's a great report by the EDRI on the application of AI fairness tools, which are used to debias AI systems or mitigate bias therein, where they show how the misuse of these tools can be highly dangerous and also lead to violations of privacy rights, for example. So now you might rightly wonder, why make another set of ethics guidelines? And that's exactly what we thought about. And we didn't want to reinvent the wheel here, so we didn't want to just publish some pages and principles on, AI should be fair, it should be transparent, it should not harm humans. I mean, these are things everyone can agree on, but are they really action guiding as practitioners would want? Are they enforceable? No, not as such. But we wanted to at least contribute to the ongoing discussions about AI ethics and what it really means to implement ethics in a sense that it would be covering the whole pipeline or life cycle of the AI system. So this is our research report. You can download it by scanning the QR code. And it starts with a review of previous discussions on ethics of AI and also on ethics guidelines and the principles that have been proposed therein. And it includes theoretical insights, for those who are interested, ethical recommendations, methodological guidance on practicing AI ethics, policy recommendations, and also practical tools such as checklists and links to even coding toolkits that can be applied. So this can be found online. And the primary difference here is not only length, so this is 120 pages, so it's not just a list of principles, but also it's kind of a coherent high-level framework, which tries to also take into account the criticisms that have been raised against previous ethics guidelines. So let's go on to talk about this report. So if this audience were full of philosophers, as is usually my primary audience, though my audiences are not usually this full of people to begin with, I would talk about principles. That's what philosophers care about, you know? What explains what is good about AI, what is bad about AI. But maybe it's more appropriate here to talk about the lessons we actually learned from looking at these previous guidelines and the research that has been going on for 2 decades now, and primarily critical research on AI ethics. So I'm going to mention a few lessons here. The first one, which is maybe not that surprising, but which is a key lesson I learned, is that we need a multi-level and multi-stakeholder approach to implementing ethics. At the top level, we can find national and international government, which establishes laws and regulations that protect fundamental rights and freedoms, human rights and freedoms, and also provide clear standards and guidelines. When we move closer to practice, we find different industries and sectors, each characterized by their own social goods that require different kinds of protections specific to those contexts. And here, I think it is appropriate to implement domain-specific requirements and standards, for example, for medical and financial domains. And it is at this level that we can also develop best practices for compliance with input from domain experts. Then, something that's often forgotten in discussions about AI ethics is the organizational point of view. We need also awareness of ethics and organizational culture that is geared around ethics in the day-to-day. We need explicit, clear roles and practices for pro-ethical AI design and development. And at the level of practice where people are actually training models that optimize some tasks, where they're evaluating them, where they're building UI for them, we need skills and tools and also continuous learning processes to embed values that are publicly justifiable into these systems. And also something that's often forgotten about in these discussions is the role of citizens and civil society. We need to build our data and algorithm literacy among the public, increase public transparency about the use of AI, build communities to protect our rights and interests, such as advocacy groups. We need critical technology journalism, and this is a particularly important subject for me. I think in current discussions about AI ethics, the role of journalism is often maybe neglected a bit. From the key kind of landmark cases such as Compass, which has been used in the US by courts to enact racial harms and inequalities, these significant harms are often brought into public attention by journalists, and we need to give them credit and empower them. Also, citizen activism and resistance, forms of resistance, are key in enabling public accountability. So that was lesson 1. And we'll go closely to the more closer to these different domains of implementing ethics in what follows. So the second lesson is about protecting rights. And here, I think I won't say much because luckily enough, last week, the European Parliament agreed on the AI Act, and I think we'll hear about the AI Act in a bit, about some of its key regulations. But maybe just to mention a couple of points that we make in the report, we suggest that at least in addition to looking at different degrees of risk in AI systems, we also should implement individual rights, such as the right to access evidence about decisions made about you, and the right to contest predictions made about you. We also recommended prohibited uses of AI, quite similar to what has been included in the AI Act. And then a set of accountability mechanisms, also somewhat overlapping with the AI Act's proposals, but also the necessary incorporation of the human rights impact assessment for high-risk cases. These are some of the recommendations we have regarding accountability in the AI lifecycle. So, for example, good practice for public bodies would be to implement ex-ante review of necessity, proportionality, and acceptability of a system. But to also, if we're thinking about SMEs, for example, we might want them to operationalize an ethics framework into a set of targets, evaluation methods, system specifications, and operational safeguards. But let's go to the third lesson, which is that ethics requires attention to context and the life cycle of the AI system. So if you're familiar with the AI ethics discussions and the literature, you'll notice that usually when we're talking about ethics, we're limited to one of these 4 stages. So the first one is the concept or design. How should we design the system? The second is the data. What data should we use? How should it be labeled or maybe shuffled a bit? How should we model that data? And how should we implement the system? But ethics is not a technical feature of a system. If we think about what ethics requires in the context of AI, we also need to think about the material basis of AI systems. What resources does it require to build an AI system? For example, I recommend AI Now Institute's great infographic on the anatomy of an AI system, which shows how AI systems require massive material infrastructure, massive amounts of energy, and how this feeds into the social and political problems of a given domain or context, geographical context. So I wanted to include these things into the discussion on AI ethics. And I also wanted to include a clearer feedback loop between the AI system as a technological system and its impact on society and the interaction with it. So a lot of the report is talking about how different kinds of morally relevant effects can arise when the AI system is implemented in one context as opposed to another. So what we really need to do is ground ethical considerations into a contextual understanding of the places and context where we're using the system. How am I doing on time, by the way? Thanks. Helpful. Okay. So let's go into the fourth lesson, which is the often forgotten about organizational perspective. If we're thinking about ethics, we're usually thinking about principles, values, and so on. But once we talk about the ethics of AI as a practice, developing technology and using it in a manner that aligns with public values and respects individuals' rights, you also need to take into account that people are making decisions and choices in social contexts which have their own affordances and constraints. This is why we recommend 4 steps to carefully integrate ethics into the organizational context or organizational level of AI ethics. The first one is easy, increase awareness of AI ethics or ethics in general. This is to kind of guide people to identify issues and opportunities that relate to ethics in their own context of operation. The second is to build an organizational culture of responsibility, using a language that really grounds your collective responsibility and care towards your people affected by your choices into an ethical context. So you need to use a language that represents your stance towards ethical issues and really to which you can rely on in your day-to-day practices. And the third one is to actually implement practices, implement roles and structures. These are preconditions for a pro-ethical AI design development and use, to have the ethics of AI, in a sense, visible in the organizational practice in the day-to-day. Lastly, organizations should allow individuals to develop their skills, to grant them access to tools and build their capabilities for ethical design and use. To actually bring ethics into day-to-day, you have to give people the opportunity to make ethical decisions, to make them together and to discuss ethical issues. And this is not it seems simple, but if you look into the actual practice of companies, how often do they have sessions where they talk about, what should we do about this? Have we taken into consideration this and this and this value, and how are we taking account the stakeholders' interests, especially those with different kinds of vulnerabilities and so on. And then our final lesson, just in the sake of time, I'll go through this quickly, is to mention that effective AI ethics requires actionable operationalization. So what this means is, when we're mentioning ethical principles and saying that, people should do this and this, you should design systems to be like X, Y, or Z, we tend to neglect what practitioners actually require when they're training models, they're evaluating models or systems, they're collecting data. They're not experts on all things ethics. They're experts on data science usually, or codings. So they need practical guidance. And one way to do this is to establish a clear ethics framework to be implemented in the organization or the team that is developing a system or using it. I suggest in the report that these should be, the values that should be included in that framework should be public. They should be also domain specific. The values of two professional contexts, for example, can differ quite a lot. If you think about medical contexts, the values that should guide actions therein are quite different from those in financial contexts or market contexts. Second, those principles and values should be translated into practices. And there are 4 things that you need. It's ethical objectives, clear ideals or goals that you need to meet. The second is system specifications. What are the good-making features of this AI system? What contributes to their goodness? And how do we implement that? The third one is procedures, which can also mean safeguards. For example, what should humans do when they're using the system? And the fourth one is evaluation methods. So what metrics or perhaps qualitative studies should we use to inquire into whether our AI system is aligned with public values? The third one is to actually monitor the ethical impact. So you need means and procedures to identify ethical issues actually when you're using the system. And you need means to address those issues. And here I think stakeholder engagement can be beneficial. And lastly, if you're going to look at the practice of developing technology as a technical practice, you also need tools, and you need to know how to use them. And this is a major problem in the actual practice of AI ethics. There's a bunch of tools that you can use to mitigate bias, make algorithms more transparent. The problem is each of these have their own limitations, shortcomings, and even can have unintended negative effects when they're implemented. So you need to actually know how to use them, when to use them, and also to know when you should not build a system at all. So these are our 5 lessons, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Otto. And now for the next 20 minutes or so, we'll have 3 commentaries continuing the dialogue on this topic. And the first commentator is here with us, Salla Westerstrand, who is a PhD researcher and project researcher at the University of Turku, founder of a technology ethics consultancy, Harmless, and is the AI ethics and communications lead at Women in AI Finland. So welcome, Salla.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Arto, for the introduction, and Otto for the wonderful piece of guidelines. What I was especially happy to read was that the guidelines take a life cycle perspective. First of all, to have this broader perspective of what kind of situations we end up with AI technologies. It's not just about how we guide the development, it's not how we guide the design, not even the implementation or even just the regulation, but it's this whole life cycle of the actual AI system, ending with how we seize the use thereof. So I was really happy to see that you took this kind of larger perspective on what kind of phases there actually are in the life cycle of the AI system. And the second strength of these guidelines, I think, was how it goes deep into ethics. In my research, I'm also a doctoral researcher doing research around AI ethics in Europe and how that influences democracy, so this larger societal structure perspective. We've noticed with my colleague Jani Koskinen, we have been mapping these different ethics guidelines, especially produced in academia, and we've already noticed that there is a lack of ethics in these ethics guidelines, which basically means that when you apply them, maybe you follow these certain principles, but what if they collide? How do you actually justify the trade-offs? There will most likely be some trade-offs that you have to make. If you want to make a beneficial AI system, that might sometimes mean that it's a little bit less, or gives a little bit less autonomy for people. It might restrict certain liberties when it gives us some benefits. So how do you justify these different trade-offs, so these choices that you have to make? Having an ethics guidelines as is clearly based in ethics, it has strong roots. It's not just a short document as Otto presented, it's a much longer one. It gives us this ground on how to actually make choices or when we use these technologies, when we apply them, when we make choices, what principles we have to highlight in certain situations, and when we maybe have to take another route, and which means less emphasis on certain other principles. So what I would like to see next, and I bet there is a great ground in these principles for these next steps, is this implementation, this localization that the report mentions in this context of democracy where we live in. So AI has given us a great opportunity to rethink our democratic structures. We currently have a strongly, of course, representative form of democracy in Europe, which means that a lot of our influence as citizens goes through elected members of parliament, for instance, and the government. But AI has given the opportunity to rethink these structures and to maybe come up with more direct ways of participation. It might enable us to enhance democratic deliberation, for instance. which are both things that haven't been so easy in this large societal context. Because democracy, of course, originally was applied in very small communities. But in these big communities, AI systems, AI technologies could be helpful in rethinking how we form our citizen participation. But at the same time, if we want to do it in a way that respects these fundamental principles, we really have to think how we localize these principles in practice in a way that supports the structures that we want to support. It doesn't maybe mean that our democracy will look like this it does now in the next 10 years, for instance, but it means that if we want to make sure that the change actually serves us, serves the values we want to preserve, then we need to do some work around this localization. And I had another thing I wanted to mention as well before I give the word to our next commentators. It's about how to prepare for the uncertainties. Because this, of course, this is very familiar for people working in risk management, for example, information system security managers, but there is certain residual risks after these principles. We might not be able to evaluate all the consequences that these technologies have on us, on our lives. So we really need to think, what are the action plans for the situations that go wrong despite all the good we do? In information system security management, we know that we need to have a plan if there's a ransomware attack. Despite how well we take care of our security measures, there still might come up something that we didn't prepare for properly. Or even if we did prepare for it, still, the adversary attack still developed quicker than our security measures. And this is where we have to also remember to implement the ethical risk consideration in the risk management procedures, to be sure that in cases where these fundamental principles are indeed in danger in a way that we might not have been able to foresee, then we need to know what we have to do. It might not be the same kind of procedure that it is that we have in a security risk, data breach or so. But it might mean that we have to take different perspective on communicating about these threats and risks that actually realize, or take another corrective kind of measure. It might not be a technical measure, it might be something else. And this is something we have to think next when we have these fundamental principles in place. First of all, localization and this kind of residual risk management, also in terms of ethical risks that might arise. That's my 2 cents in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salla. And then we'll have the next commentator online, Marko Latvanen. I wonder if we can also make him visible here in the hall. Yep.
He has unmuted himself.
Yep. Okay, so let me just say a couple of words of introduction. Marko Latvanen is Chief Specialist in the Finnish Digital and Population Data Services Agency, and for the Finnish participants is known for his work in the Suomi.fi web service and then in the ethics team for the Aurora AI program. So without further ado, Marko, you're welcome.
Thank you. So thank you, Otto, for a brilliant paper. I had a great time reading it last week. And thank you, Salla, for your very precise and excellent comments. So I'm going to be a kind of an unpleasant person here, going into some of the details in Otto's paper and presentation regarding the organizational take-up of our ethical procedures and methods. To begin with, I'll quote a couple of experts that I have listened to in webinars a couple of years ago. Libby Kinsey, the lead data person in British company Ocado, said 2 years ago that according to a recent study, AI and data ethics are the office dishwasher. It should be everybody's responsibility, but the person who cares the most ends up doing everybody's dishes. And this is not sustainable. And that aligns extremely well with what Otto has written about and Salla commented on about the status and place of ethics in organizations. Professor Shannon Valor at the University of Edinburgh said in another webinar a couple of years ago, you can't count ethical successes in metrics. So ethical AI kind of runs counter to the metrics-dominated tech community. And we need to move ethics from a search to find a morally permissible way to do something we have already decided we want to do with technology to something that guides what we conceive as worth doing with technology in the first place. I think that's perfect crystallization of the idea that organizations need to consider first what they are going to do, why they are going to do it, and why they are choosing to do it with AI. My main concerns personally with AI, the responsible development and ethical use of AI these days are a lack of clearly defined rational and realistic objectives for AI systems. This is something that Stuart Russell has written and talked about a lot during the past couple of years. The chaotic state of AI development right now, I'm talking about, of course, the GPT models and what they are doing or where they are going, and why we have fairly eccentric personalities leading the AI development in the world today. And the fact that the European Union's AI Act, my worry is that it will, in some organizations, take the place or replace ethical considerations. And the AI Act itself becomes sort of like the be-all, end-all, the one ring to rule them all kind of thing that takes away the need for responsible and conscious ethical consideration and debate and discussion as a kind of a shortcut to avoid many unpleasant and usually complex questions. I took some points that I want to comment from Otto's paper directly. So I'll quote first. Otto writes, these principles should be followed throughout the entire life cycle of any AI system from conceptualization to termination. And I love the fact that it says from conceptualization, because one of my concerns has been the lack of target group or civic involvement at the very, very, very beginning of the AI life cycle. Now, how many instances are you aware of where an ambitious large-scale AI project or a project that would have immediate impact on ordinary citizens would have citizens or specific groups of citizens represented at the tables when the first ideas are being sort of like matured into models for production? And sort of like the target group involvement from the very, very, very start, I think that's going to be, should be a priority, should be very important, and we don't see a lot of it, honestly. Other points, organizational culture of responsibility and ethical deliberation and behavior. Sure, I mean, important. My questions are how and who, meaning who are the persons or sometimes even person in the organization who takes care of this. And cultural change, as we know it, is very, 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 usually very slow and takes a lot of time. And it's not something that you can just, snap your fingers and make it happen. It's not like Captain Picard. I wish it were. It's not. And who's going to take that responsibility? Who's going to take that role? And again, any considerable negative impacts of an AI system should be identified, mitigated, and documented prior to system development. Deployment. Right. So we do have tools for that. We have the ODI canvas, ethical canvas. We have the Dutch data method. We have Eddie Copeland's excellent 10 questions to answer before you start your AI project in the public sector. So like the wallpaper kind of visualization that he did in 2018, which I think is still great. Who's going to be in charge and who's going to be responsible for bringing all these materials to your organization and making it happen in your organization, that they actually will be used? Because there's always the risk that talk of values and talk of ethics becomes one of those things that are talked about every once or twice a year when your organization has there's a big day when you talk about values and your goals and objectives and everything, and it takes one day, and after that, life goes on as per usual. And even more disregard for the risk of disregarding indirect effects, which pretty much ties to the former points, meaning that who's going to be in charge of analyzing the indirect long-term effects of an AI system, possibly negative effects, why not positive effects as well? Again, a matter of cultural change, and probably very different for a big company versus a small enterprise. Big government, meaning a big state agency like a ministry, or even my agency with about 1,000 people in it, against a small local government. I actually spoke to a number of small local government IT people a couple of weeks ago, and one of them said that all this AI ethics, the like tools and rules and guidelines will be very, very hard to implement in their municipality because they don't have the people. So we need to have solutions for that as well. And it probably won't be too easy. So there's still, even though Otto's paper brilliantly builds the bridge between principles and practice, they still don't quite connect. There's a lot of complex terminology and stuff in the paper that I can imagine taken to any sort of like mid-sized municipality in Finland, they would be frozen for a while. Like, wait a minute, who's going to do all this? And again, cultural change. I'm emphasizing this because bringing ethics into technological development on this scale does mean cultural change. It does mean new roles. It does mean new competencies in the personnel, and who's going to be in charge of doing that. And finally, the points of environmental concerns. They are extremely important, and I'm glad Otto's paper takes them up so visibly. And it's just going to be quite challenging because of all the production and provider chains that we have. A lot of Finnish public sector's data is already hosted in Amazon clouds, the AWS cloud services. And do we have any possibilities of having an impact or influence on their environmental responsibilities? Probably not. But we should do whatever we can, of course. But some of these things are just very hard to reach and have an impact on from where we are. So I don't have any big answers, unfortunately. And so I don't want to sound downbeat. I just know that after working 20 years in Finnish state administration, I know how high the thresholds are for cultural change of this scale, not just scale and magnitude, but depth, the need to understand new things. And it's not going to happen fast, while the AI development itself is happening fast. So there we have another paradox that we have to deal with. So my only answer is that we all need to read Otto's paper and any paper equivalent to that and get to work to find find new structures and find new methods of doing things to accommodate all those principles and make them operational. Big question is, who's going to do it? That's my main question. Who is going to do that? Who's going to be the main responsible party in the organizations? And to end, another quote from Otto's paper, that's actually from the philosopher Marko, who talks about an alienation machine and who doesn't want AI to become an instrument to leave the earth and deny our vulnerable, bodily, earthly and dependent existential condition, which reminded me of the movie Wall-E, where that is exactly what has happened. So my wish is that when we develop AI, we do develop it responsibly and ethically as a tool, as a help to do complex things that are hard to do with just human workforce, but keeping in mind that we can't have it replacing the essential parts of our humanity and where humans excel at. Thanks so much for letting me speak.
Thank you very much, Marko. Then we have as a commentator Susanna Mäkelä, who is also online. Susanna Mäkelä currently works for Microsoft in Espoo, taking care of the company's government affairs and social responsibility themes in Finland. And before that, she worked at Microsoft's EU office in Brussels, and before that, the Microsoft Japan Salla organization. So I wonder if Susanna is there online.
I'm here. I was just switching my video because I noticed I had a wrong camera. I trust you're hearing me well. And thank you for giving the opportunity, and apologies for not being there in person. I think this is a fantastic presentation. I really embrace Tampere University's efforts and Otto's efforts on this, and Salla and Marko's contribution and comments. It could not be a more timely conversation than what we have today. And we actually need more of these going forward. I also agree that we need to go beyond the ethical principles and actually translate them into operational practices. I will share at the end 5 thoughts what we think should happen when we're thinking about governing AI. First of all, these ethical principles, they should act as a North Star for guiding the organization and not being subject to so-called Twitter politics. It means that when the organization needs to make difficult choices and decisions, these principles should be the guiding book for them, helping to walk the path while going through maybe potential difficult journey. And this is why at Microsoft we have implemented this responsible AI governance since 2018 already. And we actually have launched our second version of the responsible AI standard, which guides our work. This is publicly available, so if anybody wants to take a look, what does it mean, or find the inspiration for their organization's work, feel free to utilize the material. I think Salla brought in an interesting aspect of value tensions, which will happen when you are working with AI technology or any technology. These value tensions will apply and come. And we need to be able to still utilize all of the principles, the ethical principles that the organizations have in place. It cannot be that just one principle overcomes everything. And we have an interesting research case a few years ago when we did a project Tokyo, where a blind child was utilizing tech for good. And there was a clear value tension between privacy and inclusiveness. Yet, both important principles need to be applied. And that's what we did. That's also a public case if you want to go and take a look at further. For the lack of time, I will not go in details of that. But it's important to utilize all of the principles and not just one. And as with everything in life, one learns from experience. At least that's how it's been for us in Microsoft when it comes to AI governance. I think some of our most important learning has come from the detailed work required to review specific sensitive use cases. In 2019, we founded a sensitive use review program, subject to our most sensitive and novel AI use cases, to rigor specialized review that results in tailored guidance. And since that time, we have actually completed roughly 600 sensitive use case reviews. And the pace of this activity has just quickened to match the pace of AI advancement. So one really have to have a solid governance in place in order to put the principles in good use. But I think Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella actually said really well in 2016 when he said, perhaps the most productive debate we can have isn't one of good versus evil. The debate should be about the values instilled in the people and institutions creating this technology. And that's where the principles and the standards and the operational models comes in place. The fundamental need really is, and the bedrock for everything, is the accountability. We need to ensure that the machines remain subject to effective oversight by people, and the people who design and operate machines remain accountable to everyone else. So in short, we must always ensure that AI remains under human control. This must be the first order priority for technology companies and governments alike. And that connects directly with another essential concept. In a democratic society, one of our foundational principles is that no person is above the law. No government is above the law. No company is above the law. And no product or technology should be above the law. And this leads to a critical conclusion. People who design and operate AI systems cannot be accountable unless their decisions and actions are subject to the rule of law. So here's my 5 thoughts for governing the AI. First, we need to implement and build upon new government-led AI safety frameworks, and there's a lot of work going on across the world. Second, we do require effective safety brakes for AI systems that control critical infrastructure. Third, we need to develop a broad legal and regulatory framework based on the technology architecture for AI. The law will need to take place regulatory responsibilities upon different actors based on upon their managing different aspects of the technology as well. In other words, we need to focus on the use cases in order to manage the outcome instead of technology. Then under this, know your customer principle, which is implemented in financial sector, could serve as an interesting principle going forward as well. What could that mean? Fourth, we need to promote transparency and ensure academic and nonprofit access to AI. And fifth, we need to pursue new public-private partnership to use AI as effective tool to address the inevitable societal challenges that will come with this powerful new tool. It is an extraordinary tool, but like any other technology, it can become a powerful weapon, and there will be some around the world who will seek to use it in that way. But we should take maybe some heart from the cyber front. And the last year, what happened, the war in Ukraine. What we found at Microsoft is that when the public and private sectors work together, when like-minded allies come together, and when we develop technology and use it as a shield, it's far more powerful than any sword on the planet. And I would leave my comment with a note we said a few years ago. This is the time when we should not ask what the computers can do. This is the time when we should ask what they should do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susanna. And if it's technically possible, Susanna, I would be curious to have your comments or the 5 points also in the chat function of this. We don't see them in the big hall, but it would be of use to us. So thank you very much to all the commentators, the 3 pre-arranged commentators. There have been 2 versions of the program. We are going with the one that you have been handed out here, so we have 15 minutes to go. So now we'll have time for the last section of the program. There's some time for some unsolicited questions and answers, but we will begin it with a solicited commentary from the Member of European Parliament, Mia-Petra Kumpula-Natri. So welcome. Maybe you can come on the stage, perhaps, or yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm very, very happy to be here, even though my hands are almost tied now as we voted on AI Act last week. So I fully support now the Parliament 2 year, 3 months work. And that is, I'm very pleased to continue this because we do not want to legislate in a bubble. So not to isolate us. And we did not. I was also the vice chair for the special committee on AI that we launched. And we had the more than 120 specialists talking to us. And that was during the preparation that I really feel that European Parliament is mature to work. And also the Commission does the normal consultations. And now even the definition of the AI, we took it very close to the OECD. And then the very latest months also made it mature that people understand why we wanted to extend the scope of the original proposal of the Commission, that it also includes the generative AI. So I think this exchange will continue. Sometimes doing other legislation on the digitalization, the world develops quickly. But as we started a couple of years ago, and I also started exchange with the people, so then at first the reaction was, no, you cannot even define AI. How on earth can you regulate AI? But then it developed, and then people started also to understand we are actually not regulating AI. We are regulating AI usage, the use cases, when they are high risk or if they are low risk. And I have seen globally now that also different parts of the world talk about this risk-based assessment of the AI use cases on the market or on society. So nowadays, if you have difficulties to talk with somebody who is like critical why to regulate, I think it's much good idea, better idea to think or ask, what are you planning to do with your AI system if you are too afraid of having high risk without nobody having any transparency or response, and not even to the single user? So one very important point here is also that the user, the individual or the company can have knowledge and can have also place for asking the recess. So the whole idea of the risk-based planning is that in Europe we have taken our values on our regulation basis. So the Commission originally planned was that it have to be trusted so that it protects fundamental rights, it protects health, and it protects safety. So these are the criteria. But European Parliament wanted to add on our side that it also should protect democracy. So I was very happy the comments I heard here fits very well. Rule of law and environment. And even we are doing now this legislative term, twin transition to digitalization, but all the time also think that are we able to live in this globe? So environmental footprint is everywhere. So also when developing and assessing AI systems should be taken on board. So also when I said that EU is mature to do this, take this step to make the first regulation, the first AI law in the world, this comprehensive, it included many different committees. So it was looked from the different aspects. So it was looked from the single market point that we do not want to have 27 different trials, or one in Tampere and one in Vienna and one in Rome, but then have some broader framework. And then also by creating a kind of AI office is to then communicate with the national authorities and national offices so that there will be some guiding principles, but then also more practical as well presented here. And then also there was a point of from the jury committee looking all the trade secrets and the business life possibilities, as it was the LIBE committee for the civil rights and privacy, how to take that on board. And me, myself, was working on this legislation in ITRE with the innovations. So this is not the regulations to stop innovating and using AI, because there is a strong belief that we can do good with the AI. But again, should you do good with AI only without regulation? Is it horrible to get the regulation? Or is it enough with this data that you always just cross the box for the consent? And I have been making the comparison that what about the medicines? When you go to the pharmacy or when you use medicines, you meet a doctor. Would you just start crossing the consents? Okay, I take it. I take the risk. Or should it be still that the environment, the society we live in is somewhat regulated so that the use is at least respecting the fundamental parts of our society? So the parliament worked a lot on the ethical point, and that was also what we were concentrating a lot, and how to make it concrete. So not everything on ethical can be legislated. We know there is religions, there is beliefs, there is love, there is a lot of features in our life that cannot be dictated by the lawmakers. But then on this high risk, we had the bans, so which is not acceptable. And there we have this real-time biometric identification. And that is one of the most difficult one, because then you just talk about the missing children or terrorism or something very difficult. But then still that vote took place, that once you have sensors everywhere, once you have a system to analyze everywhere, it's very difficult to say that you only use it for the missing children, but you don't use it anywhere for anything else. So that is on the list of banning it in a public places. So is the social scoring and predictive policing. So that you might be, because of your relatives and habits and friendships and networks and travel routes and Google searches, a potential bad payer for your debts. So let's score it. It's not a European way to do the things. So also this kind of bans are there, and they are very close to the ethical questions, how we do see the human rights in Europe. But it's also very concrete. You are here more professionals, but then for many Europeans, if I go on the marketplace, have a coffee and start talking about, you know what I'm doing, AI, they still have this, and this is also for the journalism, a little bit of the digital lights and pulps and micro chips. So I'm not happy of these pictures used always when we talk about AI. We should have pictures of the houses, of the traffic, of the schools, of the workplace, because AI is used now everywhere. But we would like to ban using, for example, sensitive tools, the tools using your senses and using your mikä on tunne, vaan tulee oikosulku. Emotion recognitions. Emotional recognitions. We would like to ban use of them in the schools and at the workplace. So then I can have my talk with the Tampere coffee drinking society on the marketplace. Should that be banned or should it not be banned? Emotions recognition by your employer? This lady here is sweating because I have sensors on the bench, and she's working here as a volunteer thing. But then I think her thoughts are not respectful for something Lisa is saying, or so this kind of it. There are limits and there are values that we want to take into the practice. So I'm very happy to continue this academic, business life, researchers and civil society work together to also break the taboo that technology is something you cannot give any guidance or rules or regulate. And this is the step the European Parliament took last week, and we overcome the broad majority because we see that it is time to set limits, and then we have a lot to fight on the details, how much to regulate and which parts of the regulate, how much environment, how much workers' protection. So then it's normal politics. Thank you very much for allowing me to join you.
Thank you very much. And maybe it would not be inappropriate to thank the European Parliament for taking this step forward. So earlier in the morning there was the discussion where Minister Timo Harakka said that it's in the nature of the game that innovations come first and regulation comes after. And I thought that there's great wisdom in that thought, but on the other hand, innovations don't take place in a regulatory or institutional or ethical vacuum. So that I think that the way to think about these things is that it's an unfinished business, so that the regulators do their best in trying to both enable innovation, so that whatever happens always happens in the context of imperfect institutions, as it were. And then occasionally there are these great leaps forward where more rapid changes take place. And then there are these very, very slowly changing ethical understandings concerning human dignity and so on, which is everyone's responsibility to live up to and so on. And with specialists having some special responsibilities in their own areas of speciality. So now there's time for maybe one or two questions from the audience. So why don't we start from here?
Work. This works?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Tapani Tarvainen, Economic Frontier of Finland. There's too much to talk. I picked just one item because I have a great example here. I think most of AI now is used for advertising. And the key issue there is data collection, ethical or not so much. And here I flat out accuse you of unethical behavior because the QR code generator you used actually sells data for everybody scanning it to a known spammer. Why are you doing this? I think it's simply the easiest way to do it. I note with happiness that the Eurodic organizations do not. These links go straight to the Eurodic site, but your QR codes lead to the spammer site, which forwards them and collects data, my private data, which arguably is actually illegal without asking my consent. So take care of your practical. I'm not the Salla's point about having a backup plan in case something goes wrong, something has gone wrong. Fix it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, someone else from the audience before I give the mic to Otto, who must be more or less bursting out of the desire to say something after these comments. Okay, please welcome in front. Yeah, please.
Thank you. So the research, many things to talk about, but the research ongoing that Otto and you described, it's about the philosophy and the ethics. But how you are going to address the actual practitioner's approach. Let's say I'm a practitioner in a decade, and it seems that I know the pipeline more than a philosopher for sure. And the philosopher knows more ethics than me. So how you are addressing that threshold value, where should we meet in your research address? How we can, you are addressing this to opinion in a singular thing, in an ethical point of view. How are you going to dictate the innovation and my data pipeline that I want to use myself for my business?
Can you repeat threshold between?
Threshold between the data pipeline that a practitioners are actually developing for business goals. I don't want to compromise there. Then how I'm going to be dictated by the philosophical aspects of it, because it will harm my business for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good. So, in general, threshold questions are very, very difficult. One way to approach them is to take the kind of more procedural approach of taking due care in advance. Like bridge engineers, when they build a bridge, they must do the calculations that the bridge holds, and then where do you draw the limit that how secure should it be? And I think that part of the answer is that you must take due care. I mean, sometimes bridges fall and so on. So I think that it's also a learning process, and it's often better to err on the side of the safety. But then it depends very much on the detailed issue we have at stake. But I wonder if Otto would have something to say after hearing all these commentaries and so on, or something that you would have wanted to say but forgot to say before we end the.
Yes, thanks. First of all, I want to thank all the commentators. Those were really good insights, and I'll be sure to think about them for the coming week, I guess. I really liked Salla's point about the trade-offs, and this is something I take really seriously in the report. So there's a a bunch of guidance on how to address trade-offs that arise in different contexts of and different phases of the AI pipeline. Also, I think there were some really good questions raised about the who and the what, which is what we're trying to address always to give more practical guidance. But of course, this is a report that cannot address every question. So I'll give the philosopher answer to the question of the who. So who is best equipped? So I guess if you're trying to look for people who can take responsibility for ethical, identifying and addressing ethical issues in the organization, then, well, I guess you'll have to find those people, and you can select those people you think are best positioned to do that. Then maybe I'll, since we're running out of time, I'll address I guess the first question about the spam. So one thing about ethics is that when you're you're doing something wrong, you have to do the appropriate, morally appropriate response, which is to apologize. So I apologize for using a bad website, as you said. I didn't know that this was happening. So my apologies, and I'll do better. But thank you everyone for attending this event, and I look forward to the rest of the conference.
Indeed. Thank you, everyone.
Also see the kind of these companies reacting to the current situation in trying to adapt to how, say, European Union is legislating them in the future. And one of the ways is trying these types of decentralized approaches. For example, Facebook is in talks of trying to build their own decentralized platform that would be
Barcelona.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is.
It's called Barcelona.
Okay.
Yeah.
The original developers of Twitter also have their own Blue Sky where they're examining the similar questions. So I think the question of kind of interoperable protocols and possibly services that talk to each other is going to be one of the kind of future questions, but I think it's an open question what the answer will be.
Yeah, and it's also a question about how will the US regulate its the platforms. There are 5 legislative proposals put forward already 2 years ago, and there's this being talk right now, and I usually provoke my American friends saying that the only thing you do is actually talk, and then you outsource the whole sort of internet regulation to the European Union. And in that sense, that's a good thing, because I think the laws that we have put forward are citizens, consumer-centered, and goes on the basic needs and the rights of the consumer. And when the laws are extraterritorial, they actually apply all over the world. The big thing for the companies is, of course, that they need to have a level playing field, that the same laws apply everywhere in the world. We are already now in a situation that one of the big companies I talked to, they said that they have to apply a law in Japan, and if they apply that law in Japan, they actually are in the breach of law inside the EU. So that's a sort of unstable, and it's not a situation where we can be. So the companies are also looking for sort of consistent legislation that actually can be applied on a worldwide basis, that they don't have to create these solutions everywhere. So it's really interesting to see also the US regulation. I previously ran the Finnish consulate in California for 5 years, and I spoke a lot at events, and many times I was attacked by people in the audience was speaking that, what do you Europeans think you are? You bring this GDPR, and it has only cost the industry $10 billion, and it's of no good use. And then, of course, you explain what GDPR is all about. And then after the panel, the very same person comes and talks to me afterwards. and tells me that, I had to say that because my company asks me to do it. But personally, I think that GDPR is really great. So I think DMA and DSA is going to bring similar kind of things. There's a lot of bubbling going on inside the companies in a sense, because the people working in these big companies, they realize what they are working with, they see the results. It's not of a big surprise that the employees of the big platforms, they don't let their kids use social media because they know how social media is manipulating people in a way to use it. We can see the nice movies that have been made about it, but that's another issue that we could talk about for ages, I presume.
Yes, better I don't get started right now. Perhaps we should take questions from the audience if there are any.
Hi, my name is Tommi Karttavi. I'm a member of the Internet Society Finland chapter. My question is about moderation. So it seems to me that we are quickly coming to a kind of an inflection point where majority of the problematic content like disinformation and its dissemination is becoming automated. And at the same time, the same goes for the moderation side. It's also becoming largely automated. So essentially it's going to be like a cat and mouse game with AI against AI. Do you think this changes anything fundamentally? And if so, what are the implications largely and especially for the federated systems? Thank you.
So I think people underestimate the power of humans moderating things. When there are, say, on the server iAdmin, there are 4 moderators for around 1,200 people. That's generously enough to keep out spam and moderate all that. And that's way below the numbers that somebody like Facebook employs. So I think the problem of automated disinformation is less kind of bad if there are enough humans in the loop.
Yeah, what we have to look at is also the figures. Nick Clegg told me in San Francisco that it's about 99.9% of the content of Facebook or Meta is taken down by algorithms. 99.9%. So they identify IP addresses, content words, creations and things like this. And still we have millions of new accounts created every month that are dispersing this one. So the amount what is there is just mind-boggling. And it's virtually impossible to have a human to look at everything. I mean, if I see something negative on Facebook, I report it normally, but in also 99% of the cases, they don't react to it because the AI doesn't recognize it. I don't believe that a single human person has ever looked at one of the reports I make, which is a problem, of course. But it's also a problem of cost in many ways. Of how do you get that? How do you get to a situation where you actually can have a human to look at all these issues? And that's also one of the reasons why it's so difficult to, if your account is being blocked, that you actually can get somebody to react to it. It's just the numbers issue is that you talk about such magnitudes that it's very, very difficult to make any sense of it. I think you had another question there.
Hey, my name is Raul Plummer with the Electronic Frontier Finland, and something attracted my attention, which you said, that how can we trust these news services instead of Twitter? And like, I think it's already since October or November when Elon Musk took over, you've come to realize that really anything is better than Twitter, and you know that, I mean, there's been lots of cases where they actually shut down journalists there who are not to Elon Musk's liking. So I think really a leap into unknown is already better than what Twitter is at the moment. And I think Germany, seen in examples, has been the sort of the best lead on this, like to actually take the government offices into Fediverse. And I think whatever the way you look at it, it's really better than the alternatives are, which are commercial companies have all these problems with their business plans and so on. So I think we should really join Germany in bringing the Finnish bureaus into the Fediverse instead of being in Twitter, where they can start to be charged for their services, and they can just be shut down if their message isn't to Elon Musk's liking.
Yeah, and the issue is also that when Twitter and maybe other platforms are setting up payments for the services, so then it's a question about equality and that you only get visibility by paying. So then that's another issue that you have to deal with it. But it's like I said, we have to be, I mean, I'm looking at now from the sort of foreign ministry's perspective, is we have to be where the audience is. Having said that, it doesn't mean that we wouldn't be open for other solutions. And I can tell you that it's been discussed many times. Where else should we go? How could we reach those people? That's really the key issue in it. What concerns me really about the moderation is though on the Fediverse is that what are on what rules are the moderation being done? That's something that is there. And because as I said also, freedom of speech is a fundamental value of the thing, and who decides whether something is misinformation and who decides what is right and what is wrong. We talk about facts, or we talk about alternative facts that we have seen on the other side of the pond.
I think I can finish by saying a short reply to that. If you join my instance, my server, then it's me. If you don't trust me, then you should probably not join my server. And of course, that applies to all services we use. Some of them are run by American companies, some people from Finland, and we have to make that decision in all cases. But I think we're out of time, and thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about this.